Our next presenter is Jake Hutchinson, a lead instructor for the American Avalanche Institute and membership trustee for the AA3. Over his 28-year career as an avalanche professional, he has spent time as a patroller, forecaster, and guide. He is a mountain safety and risk consultant with a particular focus on how SAR and canine operations function. In his presentation today, Left of Whoomph, Jake will describe how we can use elements of the U.S. Marine Corps Combat Hunter program to systematically improve our situational awareness to help avoid problems, both human and avalanche. Thanks for joining us tonight, Jake, and I'll let you take it away.
All right. Excuse me. Thanks. Excited to be here. Yeah, so as Renee just described, this is merging two separate worlds of mine, and this first came to me, except my advance is not working. There we go. A friend of mine gave me this book, and I was in a much different world doing some very different things a couple of years ago when this happened. And as I started reading this book, I started to realize the amazing similarities between sending young Marines out on patrols in hostile countries where the enemy no longer dressed like the enemy or in a different uniform and traveling in avalanche terrain. And I started to think about how I could take 30 years of working and recreating in avalanche terrain and impart all my experiences, bad judgment, and close calls into a brand new student so that they could help make better decisions, or they could make better decisions out there in the mountains. So let's just take a look. This is an accident from 2019 in the Wasatch in my backyard, and cardiac bull, and luckily nobody was seriously injured and nobody was killed in this, but there's some interesting hindsights here. This red line is the avalanche, and the X is the approximate location of the person who triggered this. This photo is taken the next day after the storm. So we had 6 very experienced people who had read the forecast. They knew about the increasing avalanche danger due to weather, and they made some fairly well-educated decisions to go ski in a particular area and avoid certain other areas of terrain. While they were out skiing, the snow intensity picked up quite a bit stronger than was forecast, and the winds picked up, and they started to see widespread cracking. They saw new snow stuffing, and they identified heavy snowfall rates. They made a decision to head back to their car on the other side of the ridge. And unfortunately, when you ski in this area, the only real safe route out involves traversing down canyon and ending up in a completely different drainage and requiring a car shuttle or something else. And it's quite difficult. And so most folks, you know, hedge their bet and using safe travel techniques as much as they can, limit their exposure and head up to the Cardiff Pass, which is what they did at the standard skin track. They discussed what was going on, and they decided to increase their spacing to limit their exposure, but they were all still exposed. The person breaking trail on the skin track triggered a small slough, which then triggered this large slab. It was not very deep, but large enough that it engulfed the entire party. 2 were carried and injured, and 1 was partially buried. So what went wrong? You know, we had an experienced group. They read the avalanche advisory. They read the weather forecast. They identified the rapidly changing avalanche conditions, but one of the things they missed was the avalanche problem. They were still thinking sloughs, and I don't think they understood this potential size of the avalanche, which ultimately meant that their mitigations were wrong for the problem that was present. So let's merge my 2 worlds. How did the Marine Corps figure out ways to take young Marines to identify things and cues where a split second can be the difference between a friendly encounter, a firefight, and out in avalanche terrain where stepping, you know, a half-degree difference on a slope could mean the difference between a good powder run and an avalanche. There's a couple of things that the environments have in common, or the environmental requirements. First is they require rapid recognition. We don't have a lot of time to figure out exactly what's going on, or not as much time as we would like. We have to make quick decisions based on what's going on under our feet. They require expert intuition. And this is that, how do I impart that 30 years of experience into a student in order to help them make better decisions? It's derived from experience. There's got to be a way that we can share this to help people identify cues and make better decisions. So let's describe or define a few things. So Whoomph is the avalanche. That's when something bad has happened, whether you're caught in it, whether you triggered it, whether you watched it. That's the spot where things have changed. By staying left of Whoomph, that's everything that's before the avalanche. We're staying proactive. We're observing, identifying, and decision making. Once we get right, the guns are off safe, we're in fire, we're in a firefight, we're now reacting. We can't go back left until we've dealt with whatever has occurred in the middle. So the whole purpose of this thing is to train users to identify cues that lead to avalanche involvements. Once we identify those cues, we assign mitigation speech. This is where we start to train heuristics rather than look at heuristic traps. We focus on the cues that provide the earliest warning, stay proactive. We don't allow ourselves to continue to get sucked into needing more and more information. We make early proactive decisions and actions. And it's to keep everyone on the left side of Whoomph. Historically, nothing new here, except we're just going to add a little step. What have we done? We've done a really good job with the pre-mortem, getting the word out, education. In a lot of instances, we preach avoidance. Getting caught in an avalanche is a bad thing. We have advisories, as Pascal just talked about. Checklists are becoming more and more commonplace in what we're doing for both professionals and recreational users. Route planning can help us avoid specific avalanche problems in specific terrain, and knowing our season history, what kind of avalanche problem it is we're dealing with. Out there in the field, we've given students and professionals tools. We dig snow pits. What's the current weather doing? What's our obvious clues? Are there bullseye clues out there? And ultimately, it comes down to that go or no-go decision. And then in recent years, we've really gotten good at the postmortem. What was our exposure and vulnerability out there? If we had an accident or near miss, let's dig hard at it. Let's figure out what went wrong. What can we do better next time? And heuristic traps and human factors, mostly at this point, focus on what went wrong. If you've been living on a desert island under a rock, then you probably haven't heard of heuristics in this industry, but this is the dictionary definition. Essentially, these are things that through repetition, our brain has learned that when X happens, I do Y. And 99% of the time, it keeps us alive. The problem is when X plus 1 happens, the brain might misinterpret that and we still do Y and we end up in a bad situation. Lots of research. My friend Ian McCammon started this ball rolling a number of years ago, and a bunch of other folks have done research and work on this. But we've always focused on the traps. How are our heuristics getting us in trouble? How are we shortcutting into trouble? Why are we missing information? Maybe it's time we start to train our heuristics to actually lead us into correct behaviors instead of waiting for them to trap us. And Ian's research facets, if you've not seen it, familiarity, acceptance, commitment, expert halo, tracks, and social proof. There's all sorts of research out there. It's really good. There's a bunch of others that have been added since Ian's research came out, but these are all traps. These are all the things that something looks like something that it's not, and we fall into, we get into trouble out there. So let's change our focus. Let's look at ways we can train heuristics, train responses based on cues to do automatic behaviors to keep us out of trouble instead of focus on how they get us into trouble. So what do we add? we take our pre-mortem planning. That's not changing. Once we identify each hazard, you know, whether it's for the day, whether it's a hut trip for the week, whether you're climbing a big mountain or crossing the street, you assign a cue to each hazard. So if it's a storm slab, we're looking for those cracks or that wind loading. For each cue, we then define a mitigation. Okay, if we see X, we're going to change this slope or we're going to move to a different place. That creates situational awareness, which is ultimately how we've trained a heuristic. By assigning cues and defining mitigations or behaviors, we train our heuristics to act for us in a way to keep us out of those traps instead of waiting to fall into them. So this all came from this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Cooper, who in Vietnam, he was a Marine, came up, realized that Marine patrols were getting in trouble, and it was because they weren't maintaining a proper state of situational awareness when they're out on patrol. Before we get into each of these colors that I've changed or modified to fit us in the backcountry, let's talk about the amygdala hijack. Most of us are well aware of the fight or flight mechanism in our brains. There's a third option there that we rarely talk about, and that's the freeze. And this is called the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is the part of your brain that keeps you breathing, keeps your heart rate pumping, it keeps you alive. It does all the things that keep you alive and allow you not to have to think about them. It also is the thing that dumps adrenaline and takes over when you are in danger. And there's various things that happen. Unfortunately, the freeze state is something that you may not be able to do anything about. So let's look at the 5 conditions. The first one is white. Ignorance is bliss. You are unaware that the world is dangerous. You're oblivious that there is anything dangerous out there. You are relaxed and vulnerable. This seems like a bad place to be when you're in the mountains with snow on them. Maybe this is the place you want to be, on the beach, somewhere relaxing, but traveling in avalanche terrain, white is not a place that's going to get you anywhere quickly, safely. Yellow is when we are prepared and alert. We're aware that there are threats out there. We may not have identified a specific slope that's dangerous, but we are aware of the specific avalanche problems. We are constantly observing or quantifying. The key here is we are relaxed, but we are prepared to react. We are ready to shift to orange, go up the scale if something presents itself that warrants that. Orange is something happens. One of those cues has triggered us to be alert. We are now on the edge of going right of Whoomph. There is a specific danger or threat. You know, we are prepared for additional threats. We're ready to take action. Rescue, escape of it. That thing that's important here is your heart rate and respiration start to increase due to adrenaline. Certain motor skills and certain neurological functions start to change when that occurs. So you quickly start to fall into that reactive state if you're not careful, if you don't have cues to bring you back to yellow. The beautiful thing is if the threat doesn't verify or your mitigations work, you can go back to yellow because orange is not sustainable long term. Red. Something bad happened. The key here is you are still in fight or flight mode. You're completely committed to whatever has just happened, whether it's escaping the avalanche or starting a transceiver drill to find your partner. Your instinctual and emotional responses are heightened. This is why people involved in accidents are often frantic or hard to comprehend because that amygdala hijack has started to occur. They're no longer fully in control of everything going on. The intellectual response is lowered. You are not thinking clearly anymore, and there's time distortion. And this can happen 2 ways. This can be time speeding up. This can be time slowing down. Physically, you've had an adrenaline dump. Think about how long your adrenaline lasts. It's 3 to 5 minutes maybe, but your fine motor skills disappear. Things like tying shoelaces or operating the buttons on your transceiver, your zipper on your jacket, all of those things start to be impacted once you're in the red state. So everything starts to work against itself in order to get you out of the red. The important thing here is once you're in red, there's no chance to go back until your threat is mitigated, meaning you've dug your partner out of the avalanche, you've escaped the avalanche, whatever it is, but you're stuck there until everything is mitigated. And black is bad. Black is freeze. Unfortunately, you could be in a situation 20 times on the 21st time your brain might freeze. You might hit that complete amygdala hijack. Your system is overloaded. You start to be in denial and confusion. People become irrational or repetitive. It can also lead to physical cramping and hyperventilation. You are now a patient or casualty of the system, and you're no good to anyone. You are going to have to be taking care of yourself. This is just a chart I did. This is available in the Avalanche Review, I think volume 38.3. But if you want this, my email is at the end. I'm happy to share it. So where do we operate? How do we stay left of Whoomph? One of the concepts that I think is important in the book is to identify the baseline and seek the anomaly. So as we exist in yellow, we have a baseline and we're always seeking the anomaly. What is going on? What's different? What doesn't make sense out there? The key to yellow is identifying a threat before something happens. You establish your baseline using your season history, your bulletins, your current avalanche problem, operational mindset, and mitigators mindset are both really useful tools for this. You observe and assign your pre-event indicators. What are your cues, bullseye clues, your snow pit data, etc.? What are the things that lead you to believe this problem may exist and you have to change something? And you're ready to move beyond. You've concluded that something could happen today. You move to orange when those pre-identified cues present themselves. Maybe you're entering a slope for the first time as a ski guide or performing a ski cut. You realize that your baseline is wrong, that the information that you walked out the door with this morning is not corroborating with what you actually see in the field, or you encounter those rapidly changing conditions that are changing your avalanche problem, and you have to stop and redefine what your cues are and what your states are. Once you're in orange, you apply your mitigations and you return to yellow. That's how it works in theory anyway. So we want to stay out of the red. Why? We're no longer in control. The situation has changed and we're reactive. We have to deal with whatever is being thrown at us. And bad things have happened. But what does training heuristics do for us? It helps us not get caught in the black. This is a bad place. You know, one of the things I trained with a ski patrol recently is write your codes down, you know, identify baselines and cues for your specific avalanche problems, whatever they may be in your particular area. Identify the things that move you up the scale. What are, you know, whether it's shooting cracks or collapses, or maybe something as subtle as wind loading, it's moved you to orange. You then predetermine the mitigation. You've decided beforehand what you're going to do when you see these things and avoid falling into a trap. Little sidebar here is the PDF for personal disaster flag test. This was also developed by Ian McCammon, and he proposes that you take 2 or 3 accidents that you've been involved in, and they don't even have to be ski related or snow related, and apply the facets test. Look and see, do you have particular heuristic traps that you're susceptible to? That way, once you understand them, you begin to know your enemy within, and you can think about the cues and clues that were involved in that accident that maybe you missed and could have helped to change or avoid the outcome. And how do we take this into practical application? We identify our baseline threats. We put our mindset, our forecast, our history, our specific avalanche problems, our weather all into the mix. We identify the cues that keep us in yellow by not crossing that line into orange. We identify the cues that keep us or move us to condition orange. While we're doing that, we understand and apply mitigations that take us backwards. We're always seeking anomaly and seeking to avoid the traps, staying out of the red and avoiding the black. Last thought I'll leave you with, you know, the first person that said this to me was Master Gunnery Sergeant Bill Smith, but you will always fall to the level of your training, not rise to your expectations. And so, you know, the more we train specific scenarios or specific problems, the more muscle memory we're going to impart, the better we're going to be at making correct decisions when our brain is going to betray us and not think completely clearly through things. So, you know, whether it's as simple as doing rescue drills with your ski partners, fully zipped up with everything stowed in a realistic situation, or thinking through, how you're going to react while skiing a slope and you suddenly see a shooting crack. Lastly, I've got to thank all these folks. These are the books that have led me down this road. Ian McCann is not listed here. I probably owe him more than anyone, but all the folks here either spent years talking to me about it or reviewed the stuff I wrote for this, and I have to thank them. And my email is up there, and I welcome inquiries, questions, anything else out there. And I lost my time, so I don't know how I'm doing for questions.
You're doing great, Jake. Yeah, we have time for a handful of questions. So if the audience wants to throw some in the Q&A, we are excited to field those. I do have a question to start us off. And Jake, thank you for giving that presentation. And I think the framework is a really interesting, an interesting one and one to think through. I know that Left of Bang is written in a timeline approach, and as we are in the preseason right now, viewing this NSAW session, do you have a suggestion for really prepping mentally before snow really starts falling in order to get into those good habits that you mentioned throughout your presentation?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do early is, whether you're a professional or a recreationalist, in the group of people that you recreate with or work with, decide what are, first you have to decide what your risk threshold is and all that stuff, which is, weeks of other discussion. But what are the cues that lead you to change behaviors before, the initial cues, the early cues, not the, okay, one crack, I'm going to turn around, or I'm going to wait for this other thing to happen. Start identifying those early on and assign those mitigations. It could be as simple as, if I get an ECTP on a particular aspect or slope, then we're going to change to a different slope. It could be, if a shot does this, then we're gonna add another shot, or we're gonna do a ski cut, whatever it is. But deciding early on rather than trying to decide in the heat of the moment when you are in a more dangerous place than, say, sitting in your living room or having a beer with your friends, is the key to all of this. And I mean, it's nothing new. We've been talking about it forever, but just trying to systematically assign those things to avoid, having the negotiation with yourself to continue to seek more info and then get into trouble.
Thanks, Jake. That is really interesting. And I think a great reminder that in this preseason period, really taking the time to list out those potential mitigation strategies and jotting them down in your blue book or somewhere where you could access them throughout the season could definitely come in handy. So thank you for that. Question from the audience. Matt Henry is wondering, he thinks that it was an interesting classification of mental status. Do you train your partners on this, or how do you communicate with your partners?
Yeah, I think it is interesting. And one thing I forgot to mention is this should not be confused with the stuff that Laura McGladry and some other folks are working on with the stress scale, because I know that the colors are similar, but these are two different things. And yeah, I think it is important to train your partners. I think the most important thing is to understand that the physiological and mental changes that happen to us once we go to condition red or condition black are things that happen to everybody, and we all deal with them in different ways. And one of the ways that we can lessen the effects of that is to train for those scenarios. And I realize you can't train for every avalanche scenario out there, and you can't train for every scenario that you're going to encounter in a market in Afghanistan as you walk through and look for that guy that's planning the IED. But by creating yourself realistic training scenarios, you can you will better prepare yourself to react appropriately and not go into the black. I mean, we're all going to go into the red at various levels when we have to react to an avalanche or a situation, but you avoid the black by training yourself it's essentially training muscle memory so that you can react without thinking in the proper way instead of becoming that person who's stuck on the side and unable to help because they've completely shut down. So, think about how you train, whether you're a professional or recreationalist. I see people down the road from me doing transceiver drills in the park, and that's great. Like, knock off the rote skills, like get the dust off. But that's not going to transfer to your partner going down. You've got to have all the gear on. You've got to have the bad weather and the limited visibility and the wind and all the other things that happen. You're cold, you're tired. And those are hard things to recreate in training, but the closer you can get to real, the better off your response is going to be without thinking about it.
Wonderful. Well, Jake, thank you so much. You got a lot of really great feedback in the chat, and your email has been sent out, so perhaps people can follow up with you if they have some more lingering questions, but really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Great, thank you.